The sun was still rising over the city when the big mansion on the hill came alive with the sound of footsteps, clinking dishes, and hurried voices. The house belonged to a man who was known everywhere for his wealth and pride. He had built his empire from nothing, and he liked everyone to know it. People admired his success but whispered about his arrogance behind closed doors. He was the kind of man who believed money could buy respect, talent, and even happiness. Every morning he walked through the halls of his grand home, dressed in an expensive suit, carrying his coffee as if it were a crown. The staff kept their heads low when he passed, careful not to say anything that could annoy him. He liked things perfect: spotless floors, shining furniture, fresh flowers in every corner. He expected obedience, and most of his employees gave him exactly that. Among them was a quiet maid named Lena. She had joined the household 2 years earlier. She was not like the others. She rarely spoke unless spoken to, never complained about long hours, and always carried a soft, gentle smile. There was something about her presence, calm and humble, that somehow didn't fit in with the cold, polished world of the mansion. She came from a small town far away. Her family had struggled after her father passed away. Her mother was once a piano teacher, but illness and bills forced her to give up her dream and take cleaning jobs instead. Lena had grown up around old, sheet music and the sound of a worn-out piano that barely worked. Her mother's hands used to dance across the keys, teaching her to listen, not just to the notes but to the feelings hidden inside them. When her mother passed, Lena moved to the city, looking for work, hoping to find peace in the noise of life. Working as a maid was not what she dreamed of, but it paid for her rent and food. At night, when the house was silent, she sometimes stopped by the grand piano in the living room. It was a beautiful black instrument, always shining, though no one ever touched it. The millionaire had bought it as decoration, not for music. Lena would dust it carefully, but sometimes, when she was sure no one was around, she would sit on the bench. Her fingers would hover over the keys for a moment, her heart beating fast with fear that someone might catch her. Then she would press one key softly, then another, until a faint melody filled the air. Something slow, something full of memory. It reminded her of her mother's gentle voice telling her, "Music doesn't belong to the rich, my dear. It belongs to the soul." But one morning her secret didn't stay hidden. The millionaire had woken up earlier than usual. He came downstairs to find her sitting at the piano, eyes closed, lost in her small tune. He stood there for a few seconds, arms crossed, watching her. When she opened her eyes and saw him standing there, she jumped up so quickly that the bench almost fell. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her voice trembling. "I was just—" He cut her off with a wave of his hand. "You were just wasting time," he said coldly. "You're not here to play music, you're here to work." Lena lowered her head, whispering an apology. He walked closer, looking at her with a half smile. "You think because you can press a few keys, you can call yourself a pianist?" he asked. "No, sir," she said softly. He turned toward the piano and tapped a few random notes with his fingers. "This," he said, "is an instrument for artists, not housemaids." She nodded, holding back tears, and hurried away. But deep down, she couldn't hate him. She knew he didn't understand. People who had everything rarely did. Still, that moment hurt more than she expected. That night, she didn't go near the piano at all. The next few weeks went on as usual. The house was busy preparing for the biggest event of the year, the Millionaire's annual charity gala. It was an evening filled with rich guests, famous faces, photographers, and journalists. Every year he hosted it to show how generous he was. There would be speeches, music, food, and lots of compliments thrown his way. Lena worked harder than ever, polishing every surface, arranging flowers, and setting up decorations. She tried to avoid the piano completely, afraid that another mistake could cost her the job she needed. One afternoon, as the staff prepared for the event, the millionaire walked into the room, talking on his phone about the performers who would play that night. The pianist he had hired was a well-known artist from abroad, and he wanted everything to be perfect. But as he ended the call, an idea suddenly crossed his mind, one that made him smile with amusement. He looked at Lena, who was quietly folding napkins at the side table. "You like the piano, don't you?" he said. She froze for a moment. "Yes, sir," she said carefully. He chuckled. "Then maybe you can play something at the gala," he said, pretending to be generous. The other staff members turned their heads in surprise. Lena looked at him, unsure if she had heard him right. "Me, sir?" "Why not?" he said with a smirk. "It might be entertaining to see what kind of music a maid can play. Maybe you'll surprise us." The way he said it made everyone uncomfortable, but no one dared to speak. Lena's heart pounded. She didn't know whether he was serious or mocking her. But before she could reply, he clapped his hands and said, "Good, it's settled. You'll play one piece before dinner. Think of it as your big moment." Then he walked away, leaving her standing there, speechless. That night, Lena sat on her small bed in the staff quarters, staring at her hands. Her mind was filled with worry. She knew the guests would laugh at her. They would see her as a joke. But a quiet voice inside her, the same voice that had once guided her through grief, told her that maybe this was not a punishment. Maybe it was her chance to do something she hadn't done in years. Play without fear. She decided not to refuse. She would play, but she wouldn't play to impress anyone. She would play for her mother, for herself, for the small girl who once believed in music before life took it away. The next few days after finishing her chores, she practiced in secret. Late at night, when everyone was asleep, she sat at the piano and let her fingers remember. The keys were smoother than the ones she used to play, but the feeling was the same. She chose to perform a melody she had written long ago, one that carried both pain and hope. It was the story of her life, quiet, ordinary, but full of heart. Sometimes tears rolled down her face as she practiced. Sometimes she smiled. She didn't care what people would think anymore. She just wanted to give that moment everything she had. The night of the gala arrived. The mansion sparkled with golden lights. Expensive cars lined the driveway, and guests in fine clothes filled the hall with laughter. The millionaire moved around confidently, shaking hands, smiling for pictures, enjoying the attention. He looked for Lena at one point and said to his friends, "Wait until you see this. Even my maid thinks she can play the piano. It'll be interesting." They laughed, thinking it was just another one of his arrogant jokes. In the kitchen, Lena stood quietly in her simple dress, her hands trembling. The house manager gave her a gentle nod, whispering, "Don't be afraid." She smiled weakly and said, "I'm not. Not anymore." As the evening went on, the pianist finished his performance to polite applause. Then the millionaire walked onto the stage, holding the microphone. "Before dinner," he said with a proud grin, "we have a special guest, someone from my own staff. I thought it would be nice to show that even our helpers have hidden talents. Please welcome our maid, Lena." The crowd clapped lightly, some laughing under their breath, thinking it was a harmless joke. Lena took a deep breath and stepped out. The lights were bright, and she could barely see the faces in the audience. She walked to the piano slowly, sat down, and closed her eyes. Her fingers rested on the keys. For a moment, she felt the old fear return, the fear of failure, of being laughed at. But then she remembered her mother's words, the smell of their tiny house, the sound of music that had once filled it. She took a deep breath, opened her heart, and began to play. When her fingers touched the keys, a deep silence filled the room. The lights from the chandeliers above shimmered softly on her face, showing both fear and calm at the same time. For a few seconds, she didn't move, just sat there, breathing slowly, feeling her heart beat faster than ever before. Everyone waited, some with smiles of curiosity, others with smirks of amusement. Then she began to play. The first note was soft, almost like a whisper, then another and another, forming a gentle melody that floated through the air. The sound was pure and real, something that didn't belong to the glittering hall or the proud people sitting inside it. It was like a memory, fragile, emotional, and true. Her hands moved slowly at first, then faster, and suddenly the room changed. The whispers stopped. The laughter faded. Every head turned toward her. The music spoke a language no one could interrupt. It carried sadness, hope, love, and loss all in one. It was not a song from a famous composer. It was something personal, a piece she had written long ago, back when her mother was still alive. It told a story of a little girl who had once sat beside a broken piano in a small room, dreaming of a world that would listen. As she played, her eyes closed, and she forgot where she was. She was no longer a maid in a grand house. She was that little girl again, sitting next to her mother, listening to her voice saying, "Play from your heart, my love. Music will never betray you." The melody grew stronger, filling every corner of the room. It was full of life, pain, and beauty. People in the audience who had come expecting to be entertained found themselves holding their breath. One woman near the front wiped a tear from her eye. A man who had been checking his phone slowly put it down and just listened. The sound was too honest to ignore. The millionaire sat at his table, frozen. At first, he had worn a proud grin, waiting for her to make a mistake so he could laugh along with his friends. But as the music continued, something in him shifted. His smile slowly faded. He didn't understand what was happening inside him. He just knew that something about that music was breaking through the wall he had built around his heart for years. He stared at her hands, the same hands that cleaned his floors and polished his furniture, now moving across the piano like they had been born for it. Every note felt like it carried meaning, like it was speaking directly to him. The hall was so silent that you could hear every breath, every pause between the notes. When the final part came, the melody turned gentle again. It was as if she was saying goodbye to something, maybe her past, maybe her pain. The last note hung in the air for a long second before fading into silence. No one moved. The room felt different, almost sacred. Then slowly someone began to clap. Another joined. And then the entire hall erupted in applause. Not polite or forced, but real, emotional, powerful. People stood up, cheering and crying at the same time. Lena opened her eyes, shocked. She had never seen such faces before. Faces full of emotion, admiration, even guilt. She stood up quietly, bowing her head, not knowing what to do. She wasn't used to attention. All her life she had been invisible, just another worker, another nameless person in the background. Now, for the first time, everyone was looking at her, not with pity or judgment, but with respect. The millionaire stayed seated for a few moments, staring at the piano. His throat felt tight and his eyes burned, though he didn't understand why. One of his friends leaned over and whispered, "I thought you said she was just a maid." He didn't answer. He couldn't. He simply got up slowly and began to clap too. Lena looked at him and gave a small, uncertain smile. She didn't know if he was angry or proud, but it didn't matter anymore. She had played her truth and nothing could take that away from her. After the performance, people surrounded her, asking where she had learned to play like that. She answered softly, "My mother taught me." That was all she said. She didn't talk about her past, her struggles, or the nights she practiced alone. She just smiled, thanked them, and slipped quietly out of the crowd. The millionaire found her later, standing alone near the garden door, looking up at the night sky. The sound of laughter and music came from behind them, but she seemed far away from it all. He walked closer, unsure of what to say. He had spent years thinking he knew everything, about success, about life, about people. But tonight, a simple maid had taught him something that no business meeting or award ever could. "That was incredible," he finally said, his voice softer than usual. She turned to him, her expression calm. "Thank you, sir." He hesitated, then asked, "Where did you learn to play like that?" "My mother used to teach piano," she said quietly, "before she got sick. We didn't have much, but she always said music was something no one could take away from us. When she passed, I stopped playing for a long time." He nodded slowly, feeling a heavy weight in his chest. "Why didn't you tell me you could play?" She smiled faintly. "Would it have mattered?" Her words hit him harder than he expected. He looked down, ashamed. For the first time, he didn't have an answer. Inside, people were still talking about her performance. Some said it was the most moving music they had ever heard. Others wondered why she wasn't performing professionally. Reporters wanted to know her story, but she stayed away from the crowd. She didn't want fame. All she had wanted was to play once more, to let her mother's dream live again, even if only for a few minutes. Later that night, when everyone had gone home, the millionaire sat alone in the empty hall. The piano still stood there, shining under the dim lights. He walked toward it and gently pressed one key. The sound echoed softly, reminding him of her music. For the first time in years, he didn't feel powerful. He felt small, but in a way that made him human again. He thought about how easily he had judged her, how he had laughed at her quietness, how he had made fun of her curiosity. He had seen her as a maid, nothing more. But now he realized how wrong he had been. Talent didn't belong to rich people. Dreams didn't follow status. The next morning, he asked the head of staff where she was. She was already working in the kitchen, cleaning up after the event as if nothing had happened. He walked in and everyone fell silent. She looked up from her work, surprised to see him there. "You don't have to do that," he said. She smiled politely. "It's my job, sir." He paused, then said, "Not anymore." The room went quiet. "Sir?" she asked, confused. "I don't want you cleaning floors anymore," he said. "You should be playing the piano, not polishing it." She stared at him, not sure if she had heard right. "I want to help you," he continued. "You have a gift. You should study music again properly. I can arrange it. I'll cover the expenses. Just promise me you'll keep playing." Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them away. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he replied softly. "Let me do one good thing without turning it into a show." She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll play. I'll keep playing." He smiled faintly and turned to leave, but before he did, he said, "And Lena, last night you didn't just play music. You reminded me what real beauty sounds like." When he left, she stood there quietly, her hands still shaking, not from fear, but from something new. Hope. That night, when everyone was gone, she sat again at the piano. The house was silent and moonlight streamed through the tall windows. She pressed a few keys gently, and the familiar sound filled the air. This time she didn't hide. She didn't look over her shoulder in fear. She just played, smiling through her tears. In the quiet of that grand, empty hall, the maid who once cleaned the floor now filled the air with music that could touch any soul that listened. Days passed after the gala, but the memory of that night didn't fade. The millionaire couldn't stop thinking about the melody she had played. It followed him everywhere, through his morning meetings and his long drives, even when he tried to sleep. It wasn't just music. It was something that touched a part of him he had forgotten existed. He had spent his whole life chasing success, buildings, cars, awards, and applause. But that night had shown him something none of those things ever could. He realized that in his hunger for respect, he had forgotten to respect others. The way that young maid sat at the piano, calm and fearless despite being surrounded by people who waited for her to fail, it humbled him. He asked his assistant to find out more about her. Her name, her background, everything. When he received the file, he sat in his office and opened it quietly. Inside were simple details. A small apartment address, her age, the fact that she sent part of her salary to her younger brother who lived back home. There was a note saying she had once studied at a local music school on a small scholarship, but left after her father's death. The millionaire stared at the words for a long time. He didn't understand how someone so talented could end up cleaning floors and washing dishes. But then again, maybe life wasn't fair, and maybe he had been blind to that for too long. The next morning, he called her to his office. She came in, nervous, wiping her hands on her apron. He gestured for her to sit, something he had never done before with any of his staff. She looked confused but obeyed quietly. "I read about your background," he said softly. "You went to music school?" She nodded. "Yes, sir. For a short time. My father passed away and we couldn't afford to continue. I had to work." He leaned back in his chair, studying her face. "And you never tried again?" She smiled faintly. "Dreams don't pay bills, sir. Sometimes we have to choose what keeps us alive instead of what makes us happy." Her words hit him harder than any insult ever could. He stayed silent for a while, then said, "What if you didn't have to choose anymore?" She looked up, confused. "I meant what I said after the gala," he continued. "I want to help you go back to music. I can arrange lessons, a scholarship, whatever you need. You shouldn't waste that kind of gift." Her eyes widened. "Sir, I can't accept that. You've already done too much," he shook his head. "No, this isn't charity. Think of it as an apology." She frowned slightly. "For what?" "For underestimating you," he said quietly. "For treating you like someone who didn't matter." There was a long silence between them. She didn't know what to say. She had never heard him speak this way before. For the first time, he sounded human, not like the man who barked orders and measured people by their clothes or accents. Finally, she said softly, "Thank you, sir." "I'll try my best," he smiled almost shyly. "That's all I ask." From that day on, things in the mansion began to change. He arranged for her to meet a piano instructor, an old friend who owed him a favor. She started attending lessons in the evenings after finishing her chores. The other staff members supported her too, proud and protective of her. Every time she practiced in the living room, they stopped to listen, even if it was only for a few minutes. The millionaire often found himself pausing by the door, pretending to check his phone while secretly listening. There was something peaceful about the sound of her music. It made the house feel warmer, less like a palace and more like a home. But deep inside, he still felt guilty. He couldn't forget the look on her face that morning when he had mocked her. He wished he could erase it, but life didn't offer that kind of forgiveness so easily. So instead of words, he tried to make up for it with actions. One afternoon, he invited her to join him for lunch, not as a servant, but as a guest. She refused at first, saying she didn't belong at his table. But he insisted. "You belong wherever your talent takes you," he said. They sat in the garden, surrounded by the quiet rustle of leaves and sunlight falling softly across the grass. For the first time, they spoke like two people, not a boss and an employee. He asked her about her childhood, about her mother who had taught her to play. Her voice softened when she spoke about her mother, the way she used to hum while cooking, the smell of old sheet music, the way her hands used to guide hers on the keys. "My mother said music was like breathing," she said with a small smile. "You don't do it to impress anyone. You do it because you can't live without it." He nodded, staring at the table. She was right. Then he looked at her and said, "You remind me of someone." She raised her eyebrows. "Who?" "Myself," he said after a pause, before I forgot what really mattered. From that day, their relationship changed. He wasn't just her employer anymore. He became her mentor in some ways and her listener in others. He introduced her to people in the music industry, arranged for her to play at small events, and slowly word began to spread. People who had attended the gala still remembered her performance, and they wanted to hear her again. She began performing at small charity gatherings, not for fame or money, but for joy. Each time she played, she carried her mother's memory with her. The millionaire attended every one of her performances, sitting quietly in the back, always the first to stand and clap when she finished. Months passed, and one day she received a letter from a well-known music academy. They had heard one of her recordings and wanted to offer her a place in their professional program. She couldn't believe it. Her hands trembled as she read it again and again. When she told him, he smiled proudly. "You earned it," he said. "Don't thank me," but she shook her head. "You gave me a chance when I stopped believing I deserved one." "I'll never forget that," he smiled sadly. "Maybe that's what I needed. To remember that everyone deserves a chance, not just the ones with money." The day she left for the academy was bittersweet. The staff gathered to wish her luck, their eyes filled with pride. The millionaire stood by the door, hands in his pockets, trying not to show too much emotion. Before she got into the car, she turned to him and said, "I'll come back and play here again someday. But this time not as your maid." He chuckled softly. "I'll be waiting." As the car drove away, he felt a strange emptiness in the house. It was quiet again, but not in the same peaceful way. He missed hearing her music echo through the halls. But he also felt something new. Peace. The kind that comes when you finally do something right. Weeks turned into months. She wrote to him sometimes, telling him about her studies, the new pieces she was learning, the people she was meeting. Each letter made him smile. He had seen countless business successes in his life, but none of them felt as meaningful as watching her rise. One evening, he received an invitation, a formal one, written in elegant handwriting. It was from her. She was performing in a concert, her first public appearance as a professional pianist. The event was in the same city where he had once mocked her. When the night arrived, he sat in the front row surrounded by a crowd of music lovers. The lights dimmed and she walked onto the stage wearing a simple white dress, her eyes full of calm confidence. The audience clapped politely, but when she sat down and began to play, The hall fell silent, just like that night months ago. Her music was even more beautiful now, deeper, richer, but still full of the same heart. It was like she had taken every struggle, every tear, every moment of hope and turned it into sound. He felt his chest tighten as the melody filled the hall. When she finished, the audience rose to their feet, clapping endlessly. She looked out into the crowd and saw him standing too, his eyes wet, his hands trembling as he applauded. For the first time, he didn't feel like the millionaire who owned everything. He felt like a man who had finally learned what it meant to give something that truly mattered. As the applause continued, she smiled through her tears. That night wasn't about revenge or pride. It was about two people, one who had found her dream again, and one who had found his heart. And from that day on, whenever she played, he was always there, sitting quietly, listening, remembering the maid who taught him what real greatness sounds like. The night of her first big concert became a turning point, not just for her, but also for the man who once tried to humiliate her. That moment stayed in his heart like a song that never stopped playing. After that evening, things began to change for both of them, slowly but deeply. Her name started appearing in small newspapers and local magazines. People talked about her story, the maid who once played in her employer's house and stunned everyone. It wasn't just her music that moved people. It was the honesty behind it. She didn't come from money or fame. She came from struggle, from a small home with broken walls and bigger dreams. The world loved that story because it reminded them that talent and kindness could come from anywhere. But she didn't let fame change her. Even as she began traveling for performances, she stayed the same humble girl who always smiled softly and thanked everyone who helped her. She often visited small schools, talking to children who loved music but couldn't afford lessons. She played for them and told them stories about her mother, about hope, and about never giving up even when life feels unfair. Meanwhile, the millionaire watched her journey with quiet pride. He never took credit for helping her, even though many people around him said he should. He didn't want that kind of attention anymore. The old him would have turned her success into his achievement, but now he understood that some things are more beautiful when they stay unclaimed. He started changing in other ways too. The man who once cared only about status began noticing the people around him. He started treating his staff with kindness. He asked about their families, remembered their birthdays, and made sure no one in his house ever felt small again. The mansion that once felt cold began to feel alive. There was laughter in the halls, music in the evenings, and warmth where there had once been pride. But deep down, he missed her presence. The piano in the living room stayed covered most of the time. Sometimes he walked past it and paused, staring at it like it was a silent friend that held too many memories. He would sit by it and run his fingers across the keys but never play. He couldn't. It didn't feel right without her music filling the air. Months later, she returned home for a short break between her tours. The first thing she did was visit the mansion. When she walked in, the staff ran to greet her, smiling like they were seeing family. She laughed, hugged them, and asked how everyone had been. When the millionaire saw her, he froze for a moment, almost unable to believe how much she had changed. There was a quiet confidence in her eyes, but the same kindness he had always seen. "You're back," he said with a smile. "Just for a few days," she said softly. "I miss this place," he nodded. "We all did too." That evening, she sat by the piano again. The room felt alive the moment her fingers touched the keys. The melody she played was different this time, lighter, full of joy. It sounded like home. The millionaire stood by the doorway, listening quietly. When she finished, he said, "You've grown even more." She laughed. "Music grows with you, sir. It changes as you change," he smiled at her words. "You've taught me more than you know," he said. She looked at him curiously. "Like what?" He thought for a moment. That kindness is stronger than pride. That real talent doesn't need to shout, and that sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who can change us the most. Her eyes softened. "I'm glad my music reached you that way." "It did more than reach me," he said quietly. "It healed me." They talked for hours that night, not about business or fame, but about life. She told him about the people she had met, the struggles she still faced, the doubts that never fully went away. He told her about how lonely success could be, how it meant nothing without people to share it with. Before she left, he gave her a small box. Inside was a delicate silver pendant in the shape of a musical note. "It's not expensive," he said, "but I had it made for you. A reminder that this house will always be your home." She smiled, touched by the gesture. "Thank you," she said softly. "You were the first person who believed I could be more." He shook his head. "You were always more. I just finally saw it." After she left, her career continued to rise. She began performing in larger halls, even traveling abroad. Her performances were not about perfection. They were about emotion. People said listening to her felt like remembering something beautiful you had forgotten long ago. Every time she played, she mentioned her mother and the people who helped her along the way. She never mentioned names, but everyone who knew her story could tell she carried one man's kindness in her heart wherever she went. The Millionaire followed her journey from a distance. He watched interviews, collected newspaper clippings, and even recorded some of her performances from TV. He didn't tell anyone, but every time she appeared on screen, he felt a strange pride. Not the kind that came from ownership, but the kind that comes from seeing someone find their light. Years went by, and the mansion aged with him. His hair turned gray and his steps slowed down. The parties and business meetings became fewer. He didn't care for them anymore. The world around him had changed, but one thing never did. Her music still filled his home. He often played her recordings while sitting near the piano, closing his eyes and remembering that night when she had changed everything. Then one winter evening, he received a letter written in her familiar handwriting. It said she was returning to the city to perform a special concert, a tribute to her late mother. At the end of the letter, she had written one line: "I hope you'll come. I'm dedicating one piece to you." He stared at the words for a long time, his chest tight with emotion. That night, for the first time in years, he uncovered the piano. The dust had settled on its surface, and when he touched the keys, they felt cold. But he smiled softly and said to himself, she'd be upset if she saw it like this. He cleaned the piano himself, something no one had ever seen him do. The staff watched quietly from a distance, understanding that some things didn't need explaining. When the night of the concert arrived, he sat again in the front row, his heart beating like it had years ago. The stage lights came on and she walked out, dressed in a flowing gown that shimmered under the lights. Her smile was calm, her eyes full of gratitude. The audience cheered, but she raised her hand gently, asking for silence. "This piece," she said into the microphone, "is for two people. One who gave me life and one who gave me courage." She didn't say his name, but he knew. Then she began to play. The music was soft at first, slow, emotional, carrying pieces of her journey. It told a story of pain, forgiveness, and hope. Each note sounded like a memory. Somewhere in the middle, the melody turned brighter, like a sunrise breaking after a long night. The Millionaire's eyes filled with tears. Every note seemed to pull at his heart, reminding him of the night he had tried to embarrass her, the night she had unknowingly saved him instead. When the last note faded, the audience rose in applause. She stood up, bowed deeply, and looked toward him. Their eyes met across the room, no words, no need. Everything they wanted to say was already in that one look. After the concert, she found him waiting backstage. "You came," she said softly. "I wouldn't have missed it," he replied. "You were wonderful," she smiled. "That piece was for you." He nodded. "I know." There was a long pause between them, comfortable and full of unspoken gratitude. Finally, he said, "You've done everything your mother dreamed of, and more." She looked down, her eyes shining. "Maybe. But I couldn't have done it without the person who once believed I could." He smiled sadly. "You believed first. I just opened my eyes." As they stood there, the noise of the crowd faded behind them. Time had changed both of them, but in different ways. She had found her place in the world, and he had found his heart. Before leaving, she said quietly, "Next time, you'll sit beside me at the piano." Not in the audience, he laughed softly. "I'll try to remember where middle C is." "Then it's a promise," she said, smiling. That night, as he returned home, he sat by the piano again. The moonlight fell across the keys, and for the first time he pressed one gently. The note echoed softly like a whisper of memory. He closed his eyes and smiled. He had spent his life building walls made of pride, but it was her music, the music of a maid he once tried to mock, that had torn those walls down and filled his world with something real. And as the quiet sound of the piano faded into the night, the old man realized something simple. The most beautiful things in life often come from the people we least expect. After that tribute concert, her life began to move faster than ever. Invitations came from all around the world. Her story spread far beyond her city. People wanted to see the girl who had once worked as a maid and now played the piano, like her soul spoke through it. Every stage she stepped on felt like a piece of her journey, and every song she played carried the weight of her past and the strength of her dreams. But success came with its own challenges. The more famous she became, the harder it was to find peace. Interviews, rehearsals, travel, new cities, and her days blurred into one another. There were times she sat alone in hotel rooms looking out at the night sky, missing the simplicity of the old days. When the sound of the piano in that mansion was her only world, she still kept the silver pendant the old man had given her. She wore it during every major performance, hidden under her dress, close to her heart. It reminded her where she had started and the people who had believed in her when she was nobody. The millionaire, meanwhile, had grown older. His business had been passed down to a younger team that managed most of it for him. He spent more time at home, surrounded by quiet. The house was no longer filled with parties or guests. Only a few close friends visited, and sometimes the soft music from the piano filled the halls, her recordings that he played almost every evening. His health had started to weaken, though he rarely admitted it. Some days he walked slower. Some nights he couldn't sleep because of the pain in his chest. But whenever he felt weak, he would sit by the piano and listen to her music. It comforted him in ways nothing else could. It reminded him of his second chance, not in business, but in humanity. One morning while reading the newspaper, he saw a headline that caught his attention. World-famous pianist to perform in Paris for charity. The article mentioned her name and her purpose. She was raising funds to build a music school for poor children. The school would provide free lessons and instruments for kids who couldn't afford them. He read every word slowly, his eyes misty. She was doing exactly what he knew she would, using her success to help others. Without a second thought, he decided he had to be there. He hadn't seen her in person since that night of the tribute concert. Now, even though his body was tired, he wanted to see what she had become, not just the pianist, but the woman who had turned her pain into purpose. He traveled to Paris quietly without telling her or anyone else. The city was bright and alive, full of music and laughter. The night of the concert, the grand hall was filled with people from all over the world. When she walked on stage, dressed in elegant white, the room fell silent. She had grown even more graceful with time. Her smile was calm but full of light. She began to play, a mix of classical pieces and her own compositions. Each one told a different story, of love, loss, hope, and forgiveness. Her fingers moved effortlessly, yet there was emotion in every note. People in the audience wiped tears from their eyes, moved by the purity of her music. And among them sat the old millionaire, his hands trembling slightly, his eyes fixed on her. To him, she wasn't just a world-class artist. She was still the quiet young woman who had once stood nervously beside a piano in his grand hall. Halfway through the concert, she paused and spoke to the audience. Tonight, she said softly, is not just about music. It's about giving back. I was once a child who couldn't afford to dream. Someone gave me a chance when I didn't deserve it. That's why I'm here, to make sure other children get the same chance. Her voice broke slightly and she smiled to steady herself. This next piece, she continued, is called The House of Light. It's dedicated to the person who helped me find my own light. The hall went silent again. And then as she began to play, the old man understood. Every note was for him. The melody began softly like a memory, gentle and fragile. Then it grew stronger, richer, as if rising from struggle into strength. It sounded like gratitude and forgiveness woven together. As she played, he felt his heart ache in the most beautiful way. Tears rolled down his face, but he didn't wipe them. He let them fall, proud and humbled all at once. When the concert ended, the audience gave a long standing ovation. She bowed deeply, smiling through her own tears. But even as she soaked in the applause, her eyes kept scanning the crowd. And then she saw him, sitting near the front, hands clasped together, tears shining in his eyes. For a moment she froze, unable to believe it. Then she smiled, the kind of smile that carries 1,000 memories. After the show, she ran backstage asking one of the assistants to help her find him. But when they went back to the hall, his seat was empty. The program booklet he had been holding was neatly folded on the chair. Inside it was a handwritten note. "You were the light this world needed. I'm proud of you always. Keep playing, and for all of us who forgot how to listen." Her eyes filled with tears as she read it. She held the note to her chest, whispering softly, "Thank you." She tried to find him in the following days but couldn't. His hotel had no record of him staying there. It was as if he had simply appeared to hear her play and then vanished. But deep down, she felt that maybe that was how he wanted it. Quietly, without attention, like how he had lived his later years. Months passed. She continued her tour, her charity foundation grew, and her school project started taking shape. Yet she never forgot that night in Paris. Every time she played The House of Light, she thought of him. Then one morning she received a letter from a lawyer. The letter said that the millionaire had passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 weeks after the Paris concert. He had left behind a note for her and something else, a part of his estate. Her hands trembled as she opened the envelope inside. The note was short, written in his familiar handwriting. "You gave my life meaning when I thought it was over. I had everything except peace. Your music gave it back to me. I'm leaving something behind, but I know you'll use it well. Promise me you'll keep helping others find their own song." Along with the letter, there was a document showing that he had donated a large amount of money to her music school, enough to finish building it and fund scholarships for years to come. She sat quietly for a long time, the letter in her hands, tears falling onto the paper. It wasn't the money that moved her. It was the faith behind it. He had trusted her even in his final act. When the school was completed a year later, she named it The House of Light, after the song she had played for him. At the entrance, there was a small plaque with an inscription that read, "Dedicated to the man who believed in the forgotten." The opening day was beautiful. Children from poor families came with wide eyes and shy smiles. Some carried small instruments, others simply came to listen. She walked through the hallways, listening to their laughter and the sound of piano keys being pressed by tiny hands. It was the sound of new beginnings, the same kind she had once dreamed of. Later that evening, as the sun set, she sat by the grand piano in the main hall. The silver pendant around her neck caught the last light of the day. She touched it gently and whispered, "We did it." Her assistant asked her softly, "Who are you talking to?" She smiled, eyes still on the piano. "Someone who once taught me that kindness can change a life." Then she began to play, a soft, gentle tune that drifted through the empty hall and out into the world. It was the same melody she had played years ago in that grand mansion, but now it sounded fuller, deeper, like time itself had added meaning to every note. As the music filled the air, she imagined him sitting beside her, smiling the way he used to, his eyes warm with pride. She didn't need to see him to know he was there. Some people never really leave. They stay in the songs we play, the choices we make, and the lives we touch. When she finished playing, she sat quietly for a while, letting the silence settle. She looked around the hall filled with instruments, children's laughter still echoing faintly, and felt peace, not just for herself, but for the man who had once tried to humiliate her and instead had found redemption through her music. And as she turned off the lights and closed the piano lid, the faint glow of the sunset fell across the silver pendant on her chest. The same pendant that reminded her of where she came from, and how one act of kindness could change the rhythm of an entire life. Years passed, and the music school she had built grew into something far bigger than anyone imagined. Children from poor villages, small towns, and even other countries came there to learn. The walls of the House of Light were filled with laughter, music, and dreams. Every corner had a story. A child who had never touched an instrument before now playing full songs. Another who had once been shy now standing on stage with confidence. To her, this school wasn't just a building. It was a promise kept. A promise to the man who had once believed in her when no one else did. She visited the school every week, even though she still performed around the world. No matter how far her fame reached, she always came back to those children. She would sit beside them, guiding their hands on the piano keys, smiling when they played a wrong note, encouraging them to try again. Sometimes she would stand by the window in the evenings, watching the sunset light up the courtyard where students practiced together. The sound of their laughter mixed with the soft melody of the piano always made her heart full. Those moments reminded her of her mother, of the small broken house where her dreams began, and of the mansion where her life had changed forever. She kept the old piano from that mansion in her office. It was repaired and polished, but still carried marks from years of use. Whenever she touched it, she felt connected to her past. On quiet nights after the students went home, she would sit alone at that piano, close her eyes, and play softly, not for an audience, but for herself and for him. Her fame had made her a legend in the world of classical music. She had been given awards, invitations, and recognition everywhere she went. But she never forgot her roots. In every interview, she talked about how kindness changed her life more than success ever could. People often asked her who inspired her the most, and she always said, "A man who showed me that hearts can change." One day, during the 10th anniversary of the House of Light, she decided to hold a special concert inside the school. It was not a public show. It was for the students, the teachers, and the families who supported the dream. She wanted to celebrate the power of music, but also honor the memory of the man who made it all possible. As the day approached, she asked the staff to decorate the hall simply: white flowers, candles, and old photographs from the school's journey. At the front, she placed the small silver pendant he had given her inside a glass frame, along with a note that said, "For the one who believed." The night of the concert arrived. The hall was filled with people: children, parents, teachers, and even a few guests from other countries. The excitement in the room was contagious. When she walked onto the stage, the audience went silent. She smiled, looked around at all the faces, and said, "Tonight we are not celebrating success. We are celebrating kindness, because without it none of us would be here." She began with a soft melody, something simple, the kind that children could hum along to. Then she invited her students to join her one by one. Little hands played violins, flutes, guitars, and pianos. The harmony that filled the hall was pure and joyful. After the final group performance, she stood up and said quietly, "I want to play one last song tonight. It's a piece that tells a story about how one act of compassion can change a life forever." The hall went silent again. She sat at the old piano, the same one from the mansion, now glowing softly under the warm lights. Her fingers rested on the keys for a moment, and then the music began. It started with a few slow notes, gentle, almost like a whisper. The sound carried through the room like a memory, full of emotion. Then the melody grew stronger, more powerful. It sounded like a journey, from pain to hope, from darkness to light. As she played, memories filled her mind. The day she first stepped into the mansion, nervous and scared. The night he had tried to embarrass her in front of everyone. The way his expression changed when he heard her play. The years that followed, his kindness, his lessons, and the night she saw him for the last time in Paris. Each note carried those memories like pieces of her soul. She played with tears in her eyes, not out of sadness but gratitude. When the final chord echoed through the hall, she kept her hands on the keys, her eyes closed. For a moment there was silence. Then the sound of soft clapping grew into a standing ovation. She stood up, smiling through her tears, and said, "That song is for the man who showed me that the greatest music in life comes from the heart." The crowd clapped louder, some wiping their eyes. Many of the students didn't know the full story, but they could feel the emotion in her words. After the concert ended, the children surrounded her. One little boy asked, "Teacher, who was the man you played for?" She smiled gently and said, "Someone who once helped me believe in myself." Another girl said, "Will we ever meet him?" She paused for a moment and replied softly, "He's not here anymore. But his kindness it's in this school, in this music, and in every one of you." The children smiled and she hugged them, feeling that the man she spoke of was still there, not in body, but in spirit. Later that night, after everyone left, she stayed in the hall alone. The candles flickered softly and the air was calm. She sat again at the piano and whispered, "We did it. They're learning. They're happy. You'd be proud." She looked up as if speaking to the stars and said quietly, "Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself." Then she began to play a slow, peaceful tune. It was not planned, not written anywhere. It was something new, born from that very moment. It felt like she was having one last conversation with him, through music. Outside, the night was still. The trees swayed gently in the wind, and the moonlight streamed through the windows, lighting the piano. The silver pendant on the glass frame shimmered faintly, reflecting the candlelight almost as if it were alive. When she finished, she closed the piano lid gently and whispered, "Good night." Years continued to pass, and the House of Light became known around the world as one of the most inspiring schools for young musicians. Many of her students went on to become great artists themselves. But more than that, they became kind people, always remembering her words, "Play from your heart, not for applause." She continued to perform, though not as often. Her focus shifted toward teaching and mentoring. Her hair turned gray, her hands slowed, but her passion never faded. Whenever she played, her music still carried the same soul, the same honesty that once made a millionaire cry. On her final public concert many years later, she was already an old woman. The audience that evening was filled with her students, their children, and their families. Before playing her last song, she said softly, "When I was young, I played to be heard. Now I play to remember." She touched the silver pendant hanging around her neck and smiled. "This is for everyone who ever showed kindness, even when they didn't have to." Then she began to play her first ever composition, the same one she had performed long ago in that mansion. The room filled with warmth and nostalgia. By the time she finished, the entire hall was silent. When she looked up, she saw tears in many eyes. And for a moment, she felt something deeper. It was as if he was there again, sitting in the front row, smiling the way he once did, proud and full of peace. After the concert, as she walked backstage, one of her students said, "That was beautiful, teacher. How do you keep playing with so much heart after all these years?" She smiled softly and said, "Because music never forgets. It carries the people we love even when they're gone." That night, as she returned home, she sat by the window looking out at the stars. The silver pendant shone faintly against her skin. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you for everything." Somewhere in the stillness, it felt like the notes of an unseen piano floated in the air, soft, gentle, and full of peace. It was as if two souls were playing together once more, across time and memory, and though the world outside went quiet, the music lived on, in her students, in the school, and in the hearts of all who ever heard her story. Because in the end, it wasn't just a story about a maid or a millionaire, it was a story about kindness, redemption, and how a single melody of compassion can echo through generations, forever.